All right, it is recording. Have fun.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for being willing to spend it with me and my boss, Kristi Wold-McCormick. My name is Noah Geisel. I am the Micro-Credentials Program Manager at University of Colorado Boulder. And Kristi?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kristi Wold-McCormick. I'm the University Registrar at CU Boulder.
And Kristi and I have envisioned this session. We have a slight change. The title was originally 3 lessons, and that was when we thought we were proposing for a 20-minute session. So we do have a couple more lessons than that prepared. And at the same time, we will monitor the chat. So please don't hesitate to drop stuff in the chat. We definitely can answer stuff. We planned plenty of time to do Q&A, but anything that makes sense in the moment, we will absolutely jump in right away and ask those questions. And just I guess also just as while we're right here at the beginning, if anybody would like to just let us know on the front end anything that you're really hoping to get out of this, let us know at the front end. Will definitely help us have a chance to make sure that we meet your needs for you. So our format, as we said, is implied by the title, is some lessons that we've learned along the way. And so we're going to kind of ping pong back a little bit. Some of them we're tag teaming, some are more one than the other. And our first one is going to be with Kristi. And, that is a lesson around just what I think of, Kristi, when I listen to you, is our 3-legged stool that kind of we sit on for this work that holds us up of consistency, meaningfulness, and worthiness. And so can you kick us off just sharing, what is that 3-legged stool and why is it so important?
Absolutely. Thank you, Noah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for the session this afternoon. As you all know, this is a quickly evolving hot topic nationally, globally about micro-credentials. And everybody's at a different place in this space. And your campuses, if you work on a campus, you're probably in different phases of the discussions and decisions related to micro-credentialing and badging. It seems to be really, like I said, the hot topic. As Noah said, pop your questions into the chat. We also hope to get through most of our content in about the first 25, 30 minutes and use the latter time we have together just to have a discussion and answer questions that you all have too. So that's kind of the format. But as I mentioned, all of your campuses are in different places. If you work at a campus and if you're in industry, you're probably having these discussions as well. Micro-credentials aren't only in the domain of campuses as we've been learning, unlike degrees and some other academic credentials. So the session was really, as Noah indicated, envisioned to give you a larger framework of considerations around the whats, the whys, the hows of micro-credentialing and badging, lessons learned, best practices from our perspective. But we're, like many of you, still what I would consider in the early stages of this dynamic. So we all work with really smart people on our campuses and our organizations. They're coming up with lots of creative and innovative ideas. Faculty are full of ideas. Some are already doing really cool, innovative things. Some are conjuring up some new ideas to extend learning beyond the traditional classroom or constructs of traditional credentials, such as degrees or certificates. And they've been doing this for a while, but historically, learners who have participated in these experiences have had to rely on their own translation in terms of what they did, what they learned, how it benefits them. And the only way they've really had to articulate this non-transcripted, non-credential learning is via resumes and CVs and things like that. And so the value of micro-credentials, as we see it, are really that they are institutionally or organizationally approved programs that ultimately render a verifiable credential in the form of a digital badge. And that badge helps demonstrate what the learner learned, what their learning outcomes were, and it also provides that proof of validity. So it's not just taking the person from their word, because anybody can put anything on a resume, and it's been hard to validate some of that in the past, but it really gives that credibility to it as well. So while there is a lot of excitement in this new space and campus stakeholders are eager to start awarding badges for all sorts of learning experiences, what we found at CU Boulder is that it's really important that we have a game plan, strategy, and the right infrastructure around micro-credentials so that when we approach these and we enter this space, we know what it means to us. People who are earning micro-credentials know what the meaning is behind them, and those that are verifying or receiving those know that there's some integrity and trust behind it. So at the end of the day, badges and micro-credentials are institutionally branded, verifiable credentials. And so we want there to be that integrity and the quality, the meaningfulness for the learner, and also the worthiness that these will help contribute to the developing a more thoughtful, diverse, compassionate, and skilled workforce in society. So that's really what it's all about and why we're doing what we're doing. And that's why we want to take our time to do a really well-laid plan and put some good structures around this so they do preserve and maintain that integrity. I'm going to turn it over to Noah, who's going to talk a little bit more about definitions and what we mean exactly when we use the term micro-credential versus badge versus other types of credentials.
And real quick before I go there, Kristi, I just, when you talk about that integrity piece and you talk about the trust piece, would you just share just a little bit about just as you wear your registrar hat, how you're thinking about micro-credentials, and the worthiness of the CU brand when we think of it in that light?
Yeah, so there probably aren't many registrars on this call, but for those of you who are familiar with the role of the registrar, our whole world is about the preservation, the integrity, the safe transmission of academic credentials, whether it's degrees, making sure that our catalog, our diplomas are accurately reflecting what students are learning, that they're synced up with what was approved by the state or the boards of regions. So we really put a lot of credence and value into that integrity of our record. And so at least on our campus, the reason that I got really involved with this initiative is because, as I mentioned, there was lots of good energy around being able to award badges. As soon as we signed a contract with a leading badging platform, we had organizations and departments on campus who said, let's start awarding badges. And, I was the one who kind of stepped in to say that love your enthusiasm, don't want to totally curb it, but let's think about our strategy. How do we know what these micro-credentials mean? How are they vetted? How are they approved? And those are the things we're going to talk about a little bit more. And so that's some of the work that we want to, even though they may be a little different, of course, from degrees and certificates, in that they may be credit bearing or non-credit bearing, because they've got that institutional branding and they represent learning that's occurred on our campus. We want to make sure that there's that integrity, that meaningfulness, and that worthiness around it.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. I know that as somebody who previous to working for Kristi, the totality of my understanding of the registrar, like probably some of the people in the audience, was, an envelope with a rubber stamp with Scotch tape over it. And so it's just been hugely just educational to me and empowering to me to learn just, the value of thinking through that integrity as somebody who probably, a year ago would have come in with much more of a, like a propeller on top of my cap, just like, let's credential everything. And Kristi's, thoughtfulness around that, I think is a huge takeaway that I hope that people heard what you were just sharing there. The next thing that we were going to talk about is, I called it making meaning. And we heard a little bit, for anybody who I saw in the chat, people were joking about the badging strand. For folks who started this afternoon off with Don Fraser, he mentioned, definitions a lot in his talk. And, I think that's something that's coming up more and more, is this is such an emerging space, and we're using words that, are in the dictionary. We know these words, but they're also meaning new things. And they're oftentimes not meaning the same thing to the same people. And so you have a lot of times where there's crosstalk, and you lose a lot of time because, it's weeks before you realize, oh, we wouldn't mean the same thing by that. And, I think, at the 30,000 foot level, even just words, micro-credentials and digital badges. If you do a survey of, 4-year and 2-year campuses across this country, you will find places that are using those two words interchangeably. And, we at CU Boulder have elected to view them as two distinct things. And we've defined them, the micro-credentials, in a programmatic way the units propose a micro-credential, it gets approved, learners can enroll in a micro-credential, successfully complete a micro-credential, and they earn digital badges as the kind of artifacts that communicate the learning and achieving that happens as a part of those micro-credential programs. And so one of the analogies that Kristi uses that I really like is, that as diplomas are to degrees, digital badges are to micro-credentials. And, just having that kind of meaning making, even internally at CU Boulder, as we're having folks reach out, just that can sometimes be 10 minutes of our initial meetings with stakeholders as they kind of wrap their heads around this, because they're not, as you engage in this work, you can't assume that people are coming in with the exact same background knowledge or even the exact same sort of lexicon understanding as you. And so having just meaning making on the front end, I think is a really valuable thing. We're still working on it, to be honest. I had a meeting yesterday where, somebody asked me a question, and in my mind, I was like, you said that you found out about us on the webpage, and that is right there on the webpage, but clearly the meaning is not being made well enough. That's great feedback for me that we need to go back and improve on that. Another example, I think, is just thinking around the word, the words of awards versus credentials. A lot of stakeholders will approach us where they're really looking at this as a vehicle for recognition, which it absolutely can be. And so it can be very powerful for recognition. And, that kind of falls into, the award bucket, but when we think of things that are more credentially, if you will, that's stuff that is, going to be both recognition and, communicating something that hopefully is meaningful, not just to celebrate, at home and to put up on your refrigerator, but also, to share with, when you're applying to colleges or to graduate schools or to, for jobs with employers. And so that meaning making it is, I think, just one of the huge lessons to share. And I also feel like I went way over my time there, Kristi. So I'm going to pass the buck back to you and with the lesson around structure and framework considerations. And you're still muted, by the way, Kristi.
I realized that as soon as I said
I can drop a link in the chat if you need it, if you lost your tab.
So one thing I was wondering, I'm just kind of curious before we get into this next section that I'm going to talk about, which is really kind of structural and framework considerations that you should take back, is I'm curious how many of you are already working in the micro-credential space. Just maybe do either a show of hands or, just that little virtual hand is fine, since, a lot of cameras are off. I'm just kind of curious who's already in this space.
And if you don't know how to raise your hand or whatever, just go to reactions.
Yes, thank you. So I see a few hands, but not too many, and that's perfectly fine. You are here to learn, just like we're all learning. I'm learning every single day in this space, and it's a rapidly evolving space too, I might add, and it's garnering not just the attention, in our state and region and nationally, but there's a lot of international efforts going on too with UNESCO and with the Groningen Declaration Network that are looking at global definitions, because as everything's becoming flatter and we want credentials to cross borders, there needs to be some more common understanding and constructs around these things. So this is really good. It's just a fascinating area. So some of the structural framework considerations that if you happen to be part of the implementation or planning process at your respective campus or organization, or if you just get pulled into conversations from time to time, these are things that really should be considered, in my opinion, to have a successful launch and something that's really sustainable long-term too. I think when you think about micro-credentials, of course, we already have really well-known definitions for what a degree is. Our accreditation and our legislative bodies tell us that, but our accreditation bodies say in most cases for a semester-based school, a degree has to be a minimum of 120 credits, a bachelor's degree, that is. There's similar definitions for master's and doctoral degrees. Minors get a little bit more, institutionally based, but most definitions for what a minor is. And in the last decade or so, more institutions have created policies around academic certificates. How many credits constitute a graduate certificate versus an undergraduate certificate. And so that same consideration, just taking it down a few levels, should be given to micro-credentials as well. Just because they're micro doesn't mean they shouldn't have any standards at all. So really some of those considerations are, what are the minimum and maximum standards for something to be labeled a micro-credential? Like at CU Boulder, we've said, well, if it's credit-based, it should be smaller than a certificate. And certificates are already small, but they're not micro. If it's non-credit based, which we are seeing a lot of interest in the non-credit based propositions, proposals around micro-credentials, what does that mean? We've decided that we want it to be more than just a participation award. We don't want someone just to show up for an hour and then get a badge with our name and branding that they can, share. And there's nothing wrong with giving people some kind of artifact to show that they've done that, but it just doesn't fit within our definition of what we are putting through the proposal and review process. So what does that mean? What kind of experiences? How many hours must go into something in order to be catalog worthy and badge worthy, for example? And then also things to think about are who can propose micro-credentials. So if you're at a traditional academic campus, are you restricting this just to academic departments? Or are you allowing non-academic departments to propose micro-credentials? The philosophy we've taken is that non-academic departments like student affairs or IT or HR can certainly propose micro-credentials, but they're really going to be in that non-credit space because they're not awarding credit-bearing courses. Academic departments in colleges and schools can propose both credit-bearing and non-credit-bearing. In fact, we're seeing a lot of interest in non-credit or micro-credentials from academic departments. So it's really, we've kind of created this rubric about, are you an academic or non-academic department? Are you proposing a credit-bearing or a non-credit-bearing or a hybrid kind of micro-credential? And what are those minimum and maximum standards for each? So really giving a lot of thought to that. What types of learning experiences make sense to be micro-credentials at your institution? And then how are you defining those things basically? So some of our early discussions at CU Boulder included things like, exactly that. Can they be awarded out of non-academic departments? Who vets these proposals? Can anybody just say, I want to award this and this is what it is? Or is it reviewed and vetted to make sure it meets those standards? And then who is that approving body? Again, if they're credit or non-credit or hybrid based, how do they differ from certificates? What are those minimum maximum standards? If it's non-credit based, are there minimum thresholds that must be approved? Are you fine? Maybe you are fine with giving out participation badges. That's not for us to say that you can't do that, but that's one of those kind of bright lines that we put out there. And then really, and when you're making those decisions too, thinking about the value that proposition to both the learner as well as to the receiver of the person that's going to be getting this learner to come on board as a student or an employee. What are the things that you're looking for that you want to be able to verify that, oh, they've got this skill, they've got this understanding, that's going to be a great asset for our team. And those are the types of things, those kinds of details too, are things that you're ultimately going to want to build into or bake into the metadata that goes into the digital badge. And we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But so it's really, the bottom line is we really want to make sure that we're ensuring that integrity that we talked about earlier, that we're not diluting that worthiness and meaningfulness of badges. So all of those things go into what are the questions we're asking when we're letting departments propose and those micro-credentials, and then we're vetting them. And then to tie on with that, what are some of the logistics that go around implementing a micro-credential initiative on your campus or in your organization? So it's helping stakeholders think about everything from budget considerations, which we have learned is very complex, to how are students and learners enrolling or declaring these micro-credential opportunities? How are the departments offering these, monitoring learner progress? And how are they submitting that information to, say, our office so that we can actually award and push out a badge for the student that is completed satisfactorily? So these are those kinds of things that are really important things that are going to be largely invisible to the learner as well as to the department once they get it kind of up and running. But you're only going to notice them if they're not working well. But you really need to have these decisions, I think, ironed out before you completely launch. So, and some of these decisions too include, where should the administrative home of micro-credentials be? When you look at campuses nationwide, it's kind of a wild card. In some cases, the micro-credential initiative falls in the provost's office, sometimes in the registrar's office, sometimes in continuing education or a comparable division. Sometimes it's in kind of an academic innovation office. There's no right answer, but regardless of where it falls, those are the types of individuals you probably want to have around the table to help make some of these decisions. Budget people, for example, as well.
Yeah, well, one quick piggyback on that, Kristi, is something I've observed just, nationally, is a lot of times you kind of get the sense that where this work lives is kind of the result of a nose goes game. That basically there was one person who was excited about it, and that somebody higher up said, where should this live? And they were the last one to put their hand on their nose. And so, I think that, to Kristi's point, having, a really intentional approach to where this work lives is, I think, to your benefit. In my just kind of surveying other four-year campuses around the country, people, when they find out that I'm housed in the office of the registrar, they are, either insanely jealous or terrified of the day that their registrar starts to notice the work that they're doing. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback there to validate. I think that's a huge consideration on the logistical side, is where this lives, and just not being haphazard about that.
Thank you. Yes. And then also, how, in terms of that, I mentioned earlier that awarding the badge, the pushing out the badge, that usually happens through a platform, oftentimes a vended platform. Maybe you've got a homegrown system, whatever the case might be. Do you have that kind of centralized, just like we award degrees centrally? We post them all in the office of the registrar. We're not the ones, they're not our degrees. They're the departments and colleges' degrees, but we're kind of that central home for posting them, for issuing diplomas, for verifying and validating requests for degree completion. So do you want that centralized, or do you want every department to have their hands in that kind of platform to be pushing out badges? So things like that you want to be thinking about. I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but the budget model that we've always had on our radar from day one, that we knew we'd need to tackle this, and it's a pretty complex consideration. Now, it kind of goes back to if it's credit-based or non-credit-based. If it's credit-based, it stands to reason students are paying the tuition for the course or courses they're taking. But if it's non-credit-based, what's the campus philosophy and model? Do you pay free for students and learners? Are they free only to matriculated students, but is there a fee for external learners? Are these available to community members, corporate partners, for example? If they're non-credit based, do you, again, make them free, or are they revenue neutral? Or do you have a revenue generating model? Again, not one right answer. There's going to be different schools of thought around this. But these are all really important. And if there is a fee assessed, who determines how much you charge for that? And so there's got to be some kind of a rubric or formula to really take that into consideration. Also, things like, your badges. There's not one canned approach to a badge. You have to think about your badge design that, students will receive digitally and they'll upload to LinkedIn, to their digital resumes. How many different designs do you have? What are your themes and schematics around designs? Do you have different designs for credit-based versus non-credit-based, for different colleges or schools or programs? What is your philosophy and your kind of taxonomy, I should say, around the badge design? Because when somebody starts accumulating multiples, what does that variation, when somebody's glancing at them, do you want something to jump off the page that makes one a little bit more distinct from another? So working with your strategic communication and design teams on things like that. So basically, the point of all of this is that it seems on the surface pretty exciting and simple. We've got this badging platform, we can start awarding badges. But our philosophy, and what I think is really a sound philosophy, is to give all of these things consideration, thought, come up with a proposal form, come up with a committee, we have formed an advisory committee on our campus comprised of individuals from academic departments, from the budget office, from the graduate school on academic innovation and continuing education, and the registrar's office and the library. So student affairs. So we've got lots of representation to make sure we're really thinking holistically around a lot of these issues to make sure that our program is successful and it's well thought out. And no doubt there are going to be things that we realize down the road that we missed. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Noah to talk about some of the evidence, data persistence, as well as championing this effort on your campus, because that's a huge piece to have it be successful.
Yeah, I think that championship piece is really huge as far as a lesson learned. Having been a part of, programs that have either limped along as best they can for, months and even years, to things that now live, in the flavor of the week graveyard. One of the things that I think is really special at CU Boulder that cannot be underestimated is the championship. That, in addition to Kristi and her role as the registrar, as well as the folks who sit on that micro-credential advisory committee that she mentioned, we have folks who are high up who are championing this, and they're using, these words when they're talking about, the future of teaching and learning and how we serve our community. And, that's a really important signal, right? When in my role is serving and supporting people interested in proposing micro-credentials, I'm really getting very few people who just discovered it on the website. Almost everybody who's reaching out to me heard about it from somebody who's just many, pay grades above me. And, that kind of championship is relatively unique. We're not seeing it at other places. And it's enabling us to just have this, it sends a signal to faculty, it sends a signal to staff that this is important, this is valued, and, this isn't just some on the vine within a few months if you just ignore it. And so, the role of championship, I think, cannot be underestimated. And, I guess that's probably, not unique to micro-credentials. That's really anything with change management. So, and other things that kind of go along with that is just the communications. We have Crystal, I see, has joined us, and it's invaluable to have folks, on comms who are part of this work, because at the end of the day, they're experts in helping people not just get messages out, but do it with appropriate messaging so the message actually gets heard. And so, making sure that you have those people at the table, not just as champions, but also, that they're bought in and supporting it, that, thinking about who are you inviting to sit at the table. When I first started and got to go meet with this micro-credential advisory committee, there's, just such diverse leadership, but also thought partnership from all around campus. And so it just helps us be so much smarter in recognizing those blind spots. As Kristi said, we're going to make mistakes, and we already have, and we learn from them, but there's a lot fewer big ones, when you have people who are critical friends asking those questions earlier in the process rather than later. And so, being really thoughtful about who you include and how early you can include them is hugely helpful. And, I think another thing that kind of wags the dog maybe a little bit with the championship is getting out and doing, communications, just presentations. We had the opportunity to be invited to a student affairs leadership meeting, for example. And, there were maybe 40, 50 people from student affairs there. And, just a quick 10-minute presentation about here's this awesome stuff we can do to recognize, just how amazing, students are and what competencies that they're picking up along the way out, even beyond classroom experiences. And within a few weeks, I heard from several people inside student affairs. And so, I think that kind of communications piece, the invitations and the presentations is, just invaluable when you think about how, not just valuing championship, but how you can intentionally go about fostering it. And I feel like I saw some questions coming in, Kristi. So maybe before we go on, one that came in from, and this is like hugely relevant, from the United States Air Force Academy. Rob is asking if we've discussed the role of micro-credentials for transferring into the institution, similar to prior learning assessments.
Yeah, I'm just catching up with the chat here as feedback, some great questions. So that's an interesting one. And I think prior learning assessment that's another one of those kind of new, ever evolving topics as well. And some schools do it really well. Traditional campuses, I have to be honest, including CU Boulder, we don't do it as well. And so that's an area where we can continue to learn and grow. Now, I can say if it's a credit-based micro-credential, that we would certainly accept that credit or evaluate that credit for transfer and applicability to a degree program. I think as we start becoming a little bit more, well-rounded and well-versed and mature in this, like some other campuses are, I could see that fitting as well. But then also, I think with badges, they're so portable that even if you earn it from one institution, it doesn't just stay locked at that institution. Once it's issued, it's yours to take with you to upload. And it's kind of agnostic, really. It's not always, even though it might have been issued and awarded by one institution, it can live out there in an ecosystem with badges from all sorts of different entities. And that's what is credentials and badges, I think. Anything you want to add to that, Noah?
Yeah, I think that to Rob's question, I think that there's definitely a lot of talk, beyond CU Boulder that's, going on, that's not a completely out of nowhere question. I think you're going to start to see more and more of that. And I think to your point with prior learning, it is, probably something that will start showing up. Kristi, you've mentioned some of the proposed legislation that's coming, may or may not be coming down the pipeline. There might be kind of overlap with that. But I also think it kind of piggybacks well as a segue to Stephanie's question about, can a micro-credential at CU be based on both credit-bearing learning experiences and non-credit bearing experiences? And I love where you took that, Stephanie, because we've not necessarily had that yet, but I think I'm anticipating some kind of cool stuff along those lines. But before I go there, Kristi, do you have any thoughts to Stephanie's question?
I was just looking for it in the chat here.
Sorry. I can go first. I think, Stephanie, that the short answer to your question is absolutely.
Yes, I see it.
We on the for credit side, we're saying that, part of those logistical and framework considerations is that a micro credential needs to be smaller than a certificate. So depending on, what college is, that could be anywhere from 8 to 11, 12 credit hours, but it needs to be larger than one credit. Or one course. The course is already on the transcript, so we wanted to avoid take a course or in a badge. And so, but when we say it needs to be larger than a course, we're not necessarily saying it needs to be 2 courses. And so that's where we go, Stephanie, to your question about, maybe the micro credential has credit as a part of it because of that one course, but maybe there's other things being brought in. There could be experiential learning, there could be internships, externships. Something that I think, I'd be surprised if we don't start to see it pop up is, recognition of external credentials, that you may have a student in design courses who's earning Adobe certifications. For example, does that school start to offer a micro credential that says, hey, in addition to this course, we can wrap in these industry recognized credentials and count them towards some of these other things. And I think that, somebody actually earlier today asked me, what about, there's stuff on our LinkedIn learning license. Can we take some of these already existing kind of learning opportunities rather than make new ones and actually kind of fold them in and stack them together what we have? And, I hope the answer is yes, but I don't know if you have other thoughts about that, Kristi.
No, I absolutely. I mean, I think you hit on the key points. And actually on our micro-credential proposal form, we do ask, is this credit-based? Is it non-credit based? Or is it a hybrid? And hybrid are those that are blending maybe 1 or 2 credit-bearing courses with some other kind of experiences, whether it be they have to, do some kind of portfolio or, do some presentation, or they do, I think Noah mentioned a service learning activity or some kind of an abroad experience, and then they come back and they kind of tie all of that together. And that way too, instead of just getting on the transcript, study abroad, 10 credits from University of Barcelona, but there's not a lot of meat. Maybe they can do some bundling of some different things. And then when the student shares that badge with somebody else, they can click into it and read more about what that learning entailed and what the experiences the student had. There's a lot of really exciting things happening kind of in this space too around comprehensive learner records that are kind of similar to where we can, which we're at the very beginning stages of discussing a CLR, but a comprehensive learning record is kind of a transcript that supplements the traditional academic transcript where you can house other types of learning that goes on. So instead of just seeing like 4 credits of research, you can say, put on the CLR, I did research in this professor's lab, and this is what I did. And this is, I published on, in this journal with him. And so there's lots of different exciting, we thought, that might also be a pretty sound home to store some of these micro credentials that are earned also. But yeah, definitely hybrid, I think makes a lot of sense for that blend of credit bearing and then something else that the student does to kind of solidify and demonstrate learning that happened in the classroom.
Do you know, Kristi, before we go on, I feel like Adam asked a question. It's about 7 up from the bottom, extrapolating to a decade from now, if you see that one. Asking about, would CU put limits onto credits that are associated with badges? So a student come in on campus expecting to earn a full graduate certificate or full degree based on prior learning.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the limit, I'm not sure if, let me just read the rest of this here again. Full graduates. Yeah, I think, we would still have our traditional policies in terms of if it's a credit-based micro-credential that was awarded at one institution, we still have graduate school rules or undergraduate, program rules in terms of how many external credits can be applicable to an academic credential. So that would be the case. If there's a question about putting a limit on number of badge credits in general, I wouldn't see that we would put a limit on how many badges somebody could earn or credits that can be applied toward badges. Get into a lot of complicated rules with if they're taking credit bearing course activity that's not applicable to their degree, we are still bound to say financial aid regulations and things like that in terms of what will get funded, what won't get funded. The federal government's usually the last to come along on change on some of this, but if I'm understanding correctly the sentence, we would not take all kind from another institution in awarding a certificate or a badge at CU. So that would be, kind of written into some policy where in order to be our badge that represents learning happening at CU, you have to have X number of, credits or experiences completed at CU, because otherwise it's really not our badge. We can put our name on it, but the learning didn't happen with us, and it's kind of false advertising.
I love that, and I also feel like that's probably a really great segue. There was one final kind of lesson, that we wanted to share, and I think it really relates to some of the questions that are pulling in. So maybe I'll jump back over to that, and as you have questions, attendees, please do continue to drop those in. These are really awesome just to see the way you're thinking about this. But our we wanted to just share on our lessons is around data considerations. And so, some of those, just what we think about on the metadata, especially that can live inside of our digital credentials. So, in a lot of ways, it comes down to what's separating, our digital credentials from just being a digital certificate of achievement. And so, some of the stuff that we've really kind of decided to put a line in the sand on, if you will, is that we do have to have metadata that says things like, this is what this is about. It's not just the title of the program that's on the badge. There's actually a description there. There's actually a criteria statement. And so, versus something, where it says, The criteria for a participation thing might be that somebody paid their money, they showed up for the day, they successfully exhaled shortly after inhaling, and now they get this certificate. We're really looking for, measurable criteria that helps separate people from, who showed up to who demonstrated that they met the, criteria to show the competencies or skills that are being asserted with the badges that are being issued. And so, that gets into just some really geeky stuff that we think is cool. This is where we spend a lot of our days swim in. So, one of the people who asked kind of about the, traditional credit hour, that's definitely predictable. It's definitely a place of comfort for a lot of stakeholders. And at the same time, at CU Boulder, on especially our non-credit micro-credentials, we're definitely letting people say a number of hours, but we're really looking more than that at the demonstration of having met the competencies. So we're really less looking at, was this, 40 hours worth of work versus 4 hours of worth of work. We're really more interested in, what does somebody have to do to demonstrate that they have, that they met the criteria for this, such that it's worthy of, going back to that three-legged stool, the CU Boulder brand, that we're issuing a credential. It's set, we're putting our reputation on the line. And so, really looking at that is a key component for us. And also, we've had a couple conversations with users internally where, they were looking for something that was more of just a kind of completion certificate. And, once we're able to share some of this metadata and just how powerful it is that we can do skills tagging. And so when they're naming, these are the skills that somebody's acquiring, or demonstrating in this program. And then on our badge issuing platform, when we issue those badges, users can actually click on those badges and access real-time labor insights. They can find, literally thousands of jobs that are open today all over the country with salary ranges, locations, and titles that share common language with those kind of skills assertions. So there's some really powerful stuff that we have the ability to do. It makes this so much, just greater and transformative and just change the world type stuff than it's just a digital version of a paper certificate.
I'm looking real quickly at 3 questions in a row here from Michael, Doug, and Chris. So I can just kind of rapid fire these, maybe. The stackable, for Michael's question, that yes, I think especially when you're in the credit bearing space, and again, we are doing micro-credentials, both non-credit and credit-based. Right now, non-credit seems to be a little more popular, but we'll see. There could be kind of ebbs and flows in terms of different, what's more trending. But from the credit-bearing ones, that yes, certainly you could do some stackable micro-credentials that if you complete these 2 or these 3 micro-credential programs, it equals a certificate. It's kind of that hook, like come and dip your toe and get a little experience, and then you like that, you can take a little bit more and a little bit more, and then you get the certificate, just like we're doing stackable certificates into degree programs nowadays, especially at the master's level. To Doug's question about, that was kind of the credit hour notion that I just talked about, that we are really looking at credit and non-credit both. And then Chris was, let's see, transcribing micro-credentials. So that is something we've had discussions on. And, a traditional transcript really is an academic transcript. So we've been a little careful to not commit to saying we're going to put all micro-credentials on the academic transcript. We may decide down the road, we haven't yet, that credit-bearing micro-credentials will go on the transcript. Right now, the courses already do. But that kind of brings into play that notion that we touched on earlier about the CLR, the Comprehensive Learner Record, which is really a supplemental record to the academic transcript, where you can display and do deep links into other types of learning and experiences that the student may have, from, that kind of, service learning to research to leadership and things like that, experiences that they've had on campus. And so it might be kind of 2 different types of transcripts working in complement with one another.
There's a question around, well, I guess one quick thing, Chrissy, I have a question for you, that there are also something that I guess we should let people know is once on the badge side of the micro credential, you know, once we issue digital badges, those are owned by the learners. And so while, you know, so they no longer are relying on us once it's been issued to anytime they want to share that, you know, on a job application or when applying, you know, to a grad school or something like that, they no longer have to come back to CU Boulder to ask for permission to use that digital badge. Once they have it, it is theirs and they own it. And so, you know, that there's also a lot of things that there's, you know, almost kind of a democratization kind of movement happening around that. And so, you know, whereas we're going to be really careful on the institutional side, you know, I think that there's also a lot of empowerment that we're going to start to see going over to the learner side on how they're able to use and share these. Somebody asked a question, Kristi, about the skills. Sorry, there a lot of questions came in at the same time here. I apologize. There was a question around the actual skills. Tracy, there we go. Do we have any good resources on measurable criteria and skills tagging? It is tough to measure in a meaningful way. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Kristi, but what I would say is, especially on the measurable criteria, you know, that's really, you know, on the work of the proposing unit, right? So at CU Boulder, unit can propose a micro credential. And so especially on the academic side, and hopefully they, you know, they're already coming from a place of having that criteria, you know, already in their syllabi. As far as the skills tagging goes, there is definitely a lot of work going on with that. And one of the neat things is it's not happening exclusively in the education space. You know, it's not, you know, the world of education trying to come up with a fix for the real world that the real world didn't ask for. For example, last week, the United States Chamber of Commerce had a 2-day summit all about skills and just, you know, really talking about how do we get a, you know, to a place of having common skills taxonomies and having interoperability so that it works on any technology platform. And that might be way in the weeds and too geeky for most people. You can earmuffs me if you need to.
Yeah, I see questions in here too about, you know, are they for undergrads as well as graduate? And, you know, if it's credit-based, again, there's this kind of distinguishing line. If it's credit-based, that is pretty clear to say these are graduate courses versus undergraduate courses. If it's experiential or non-credit based, you know, it's really the proposing department has to think about who their target learner is. Do they want somebody who's already, say, has earned a degree and this is to do some kind of added value, some skills, or are they intended for the undergraduate? I think we are seeing and talking to departments that are looking at this at all levels for undergraduate employees. We've talked to engineering labs that are doing some really cool things with robotics that maybe aren't traditionally transcripted, but I think things like that are targeting some traditional undergraduates. One other thing too that I just might mention, and if you're at a higher ed campus, which I know a lot of you are, or most of you are, even that notion around certificates. A few years ago, we did a real big overhaul and cleanup and evaluation of our certificate offerings. And because we had a lot of things that the university is calling certificates, but what is a certificate? And so we actually have formal policies for graduate and undergraduate certificates. How many credits? What do they mean? How are they approved? And when they go through that approval process, that means that they are eligible to be in our university catalog. They go on our transcripts. We award them a university sealed certificate as well as a digital certificate for that experience. But there's all of these other things that would be called certificates. So sometimes we joke that they're the big C's versus the little C certificates. And so I think what we're going to do too is take a closer look at those little C certificates that maybe for one reason or other haven't been proposed or approved to be an official certificate, or they don't meet the criteria to see, you know, are these really good opportunities? It's not always about inventing new things and coming up with new ideas to create micro-credentials. We're already doing a whole bunch of really cool stuff on our campus that people are experiencing, and they're, again, putting it on their resume, but there's no way to verify it. So how can we kind of survey and assess the landscape to find out all these cool little certain things that learning that's happening and turn them into micro-credentials so that people that are walking away and graduating have these verifiable branded credentials that will really help them in their next opportunities in life, in the marketplace, and in their next higher ed ventures.
Well, I know that, thank you so much for that. And I know that we are just about out of time. I can't thank people enough for joining us late in the afternoon on your Wednesday to dive into these nerdy weeds with the two of us. We really love this stuff and we're passionate about it. And, please do reach out to us. We're happy to, continue to be resource and thought partners for you and your organization. And I can drop our emails into the chat when we're done here, but just thank you everybody so much for taking the time to be with us. And Kristi, thank you for just being so generous with your time and expertise.
Oh, thank you for putting this together. I'm dropping my email in the chat right now. And thank you, everybody. Good luck with your micro-credentialing adventures. And I can't wait to share stories and exchange ideas and learn from each other in the future.
And this is being recorded, so you can come back to it. It will be in the hub and then it will be in other places that we will let you know about. So thank you for a wonderful presentation and you can always come back to this. So have a good night or a good day, I should say, right? Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Good job,
you.
Noah.
Good job. Bye-bye.